We're going to end today with flashpoints. Juan Zarate, as always, our national security analyst, is here at the desk. And Juan, it's been another busy week.
Bob, a whirlwind week.
President's on the road, high-stakes trip, went to India, went to Indonesia. How's that going so far?
Well, I think it's going relatively well from the White House's perspective. I think one way to view this trip is really a trip by the United States and the American president to the anchors of our Asian strategy moving forward. You have in India and Indonesia rising powers economically, geopolitically. You have in South Korea and Japan old allies that need reinforcing. In some ways, symbolically, are anchors in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Northeast Asia. These are democracies. These are important economies. They're also important counterweights to the rise of China, in particular if you look at India and the role that India can play. And so the messages that have been coming out of the visits, the symbolic gestures have been quite important. For example, the president signaling that he would support India's rise to prominence in the Security Council.
But he can't make that happen.
He can't make that happen. This is a problem with promising it, because certainly it's not going to happen in his first term. If he has a second term, maybe not even then. And so it's expectation weighed down with a lot of baggage. And so the president has to be obviously careful with anything he promises. But other things like lifting export controls on certain technologies, very important to the Indians, viewed symbolically and importantly. Some trade deals worth upwards of $10 billion, important in terms of jobs message back in the United States. And so these are important visits. In Indonesia, a trip that he'd canceled 3 times prior, unfortunately, an important visit back to where he grew up. He spent 4 years of his childhood. A message to the most populous Muslim country, a democracy in the region that is in many ways a model of moderation and modernity within a Muslim context. And so that's important. And now, as he's in South Korea now, he's going to Japan next. In South Korea, the focus is on the G20, all the economic problems. U.S. now under fire for what the Fed has done in injecting $600 billion with a quantitative easing. I think the U.S. had hoped that this meeting would be kind of a circling of the wagons around the Chinese, to get the Chinese to allow the currency to float a bit, to allow for a valuation up of the yuan. And so in any event, this is a very important set of visits, a resetting, if you will, of the relationship with Asia. And I think symbolically for the viewers can be viewed as really visiting the countries that matter not only now but will matter in the future in terms of our interests in the region.
All right. One of the trouble spots we've talked about from time to time is Yemen. And now this week, here comes another tape from the radical American-born cleric Anwar al-Awlaki. What's the significance of this, and does this raise the stakes with Yemen?
Well, Anwar al-Awlaki again is in the headlines here, Bob. And this latest tape, this one that came out Monday via the internet, again signals that Awlaki is proving that he is the siren song for the al-Qaeda movement in Yemen, trying to promote terrorist activity, trying to recruit Westerners, and trying to, in essence, embed this global jihadi DNA into the international system via the internet. What's interesting about this message is what he's saying is there is no need for religious justification anymore for attacks on American civilians. We all know about the bin Laden fatwas, calls for war against the United States in 1996-98. But what has happened since then have been questions as to what is religiously, morally legitimate to do. Can you kill civilians? Can you kill Americans? What scenarios are legitimate? And frankly, I think this is something that Awlaki's been dealing with a lot. We know that the Fort Hood shooter, for example, was sending email queries about precisely that. What can be done? What should be done? How should you think about this? And so in some ways, this Monday message is a really important one, because he says no longer do you need specific fatwas or specific guidance. The United States is part of this camp of the devil.
Right,
and you are sort of free reign. You can attack Americans at will, and it's justified, and it's morally and theologically legitimate. That's an incredibly important message, in particular from someone who's an American and who is listened to by Western radicals.
For a long time, there was a debate about whether Awlaki was just a preacher, an inspirer, or whether he really had crossed the line to become a full-fledged terrorist. I think he's left little doubt now.
Well, it's clear that he's always been the Pied Piper via the internet for Western recruits. But given what authorities are saying, given what we know, given how the Yemeni government has now reacted with an order of capturing him dead or alive, that he has crossed the line, that he has become an operational actor in al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula out of Yemen. And so that makes him a prime target for the United States, not just worried about his radicalizing effects, but also the role he's playing in plots like the December 25th plot. Interestingly, Bob, the same time that this video came out on Monday, we saw the legal arguments here in Washington, D.C., brought by al-Awlaki's father.
With the ACLU.
With the ACLU, claiming that the U.S. government could not legitimately target his son, Anwar al-Awlaki, without some degree of due process. And so that legal case is underway, with the U.S. government arguing that, A, the father and ACLU have no standing. If al-Awlaki can put out tapes, he can certainly file his own legal briefs, he can certainly present himself in court.
He didn't help his father's case.
He didn't help his father's case, and certainly this is going to be interesting because the U.S. government is also claiming state secrets, also claiming that this is interference with the commander-in-chief duties, and also claiming, and this may come as a surprise to viewers, again, that we're talking about a global battlefield. We're not just talking about war against al-Qaeda in Afghanistan or Iraq, but this actually extends to a war in places like Yemen, thereby making somebody like al-Awlaki who's joined the enemy force a legitimate target.
You mentioned briefly there al-Qaeda in Iraq. I think a lot of people were under the belief that that had been dismantled or pretty much moved aside, but not so fast.
This has been a bloody week in Baghdad, unfortunately, Bob. What we've seen is upwards of 120 people killed. We all heard about this massacre of the Catholic Church during Sunday services. Upwards of about 55 people killed, 67 or 68 people wounded. That was then followed by a series of car bombings in Baghdad that killed numerous others, targeting, again, not just Christians and Catholics, but also Shiites. And what you have at this point, Bob, unfortunately, is a resurgence of al-Qaeda claiming all of those attacks, with the Sunni minority growing more and more disillusioned with the political process. What you have in some ways politically is not only stagnation, but you have, I think, Iraqi politicians fiddling while Baghdad is burning. And in many ways, what we see is political paralysis that is being tracked then with increasing violence that is increasing the sectarian tension and is not good news for the United States.
So al-Qaeda in Iraq is still a significant enemy.
It's a significant enemy, doesn't project itself outwardly, but really has an ability to impact internally, and this adds to the political tension in Baghdad.
Our final flashpoint this week is in Burma, where they just had elections. Tell me what happened there.
These were elections in Burma, sometimes called Myanmar, the first election since 1990, when we recall the National League of Democracy, led by Aung San Suu Kyi, the Nobel Prize winner, actually won the election. That was then followed by a military coup, and the junta has ruled in Burma ever since. What you have is really not a real election. President Obama called it neither free nor fair. The junta really rigged this thing. And aside from all the rigging, there was not very good participation. Some estimates about 35% participation. Really, the junta was trying to use the elections as a way of cleansing itself, legitimating its rule. And in some ways, the partners in the region who have an interest in all of the things that Burma has to offer, like oil and gas, countries like India and China, were really hoping that these elections would wipe the slate clean and would allow the international community to really engage in Burma. That hasn't happened because, in part, the junta has done a terrible job with the elections. Secondly, there hasn't been sort of a rallying around the junta, and you've got the United States now saying this wasn't a free and fair election. And you interestingly have in 3 days the release of Aung San Suu Kyi from house arrest. And so all of that is going to add to the mix. Added to that, there's now a state of emergency in Burma because of increased fighting along the borders with some of the ethnic minorities. And so not only do you have potentially a failed election strategy, but you've got increased conflict and now Aung San Suu Kyi on the way out of house arrest. And this is just more problems for the junta and more problems for countries like China and India that want to engage in Burma.
So going forward, the constant there is instability.
Instability and a lot of questions as to how the international community, and in particular the important players in the region, India and China, how they react.
All right. Well, Juan Zarate, thanks again, as always, for Flashpoints this week.
My pleasure,
Enjoyed
Bob.
it.
Thank you.